we have to share for the trip. So I was glad to look through some of those. Also, I guess when Hunter and Mallory Jackson were leaving, going through the foyer, I guess did you ask him? Did you ask him if he's leads singing? And he said, yes, I do. So I think you could tell by the expressions around him that we might have a job for him. So might have another song leader in our future here. So that's wonderful. I did want to review a little bit some of the things we have been talking about some of the people we've touched on over the last couple weeks. Before we get started, I want to kind of plant a question in your mind because we're going to come back to it at the end. The question is, if there was somebody in the New Testament that you could hear their story, who would it be? Now, there's so many places in the New Testament we only hear a fraction, right? Or one thing that happened. So if there's somebody that you could somehow magically sit down with or ask the question, tell me your story, who would that person be? And I'm going to come back to that because that's going to be the last question I ask, and we'll talk about that a little bit since we're talking about people. But we started out first talking about Nicodemus. We talked about how he was a leader. He seemed to be a wise individual, probably knew the Torah very well. He was a questioner. You know, we see a couple instances where he's asking questions. He's also genuine. He was a follower of Christ. We also have how he's a teacher. He sought knowledge. We talked about how he's wealthy. There's an example of when they went to get Jesus' body, how what he brought was very valuable. So there's a thought that he was actually very wealthy too. But he also was seen as, we talked about him being brave and taking a risk. Maybe others had questions about Jesus, but they were too fearful to go to him. But Nicodemus found a way to go to him and to talk to him. So that was some of the stuff we talked about with Nicodemus. The next slide. Have it on. Last week we talked about Peter. I was glad I didn't get the main comment about Peter that I got from the teenagers. When we watched some of The Chosen, some of the stuff about Peter. Yeah, Bethany's smiling because I think she knows this. I was talking about Peter and asked them about Peter, and one of the young ladies in the class said, well, he's cute. And that was like their characteristic for Peter. And and I just kind of like rolled my eyes, and then I looked at one of the other girls, and she looked at me and she said, she's not wrong. So I was like, oh, okay. But then we got into more of the actual characteristics that I was after. But we talked a little bit about Peter last week, how he was human. He made mistakes. He was impulsive, sometimes got his foot in his mouth. But he did ask questions. We see a lot of times, like I said, I didn't realize or it just didn't click, or don't remember. A lot of the times when somebody was asking a question about something that happened, it was Peter was the one that was asking it. He was the one that kind of stepped forward and asked the question. He was both a leader and a follower. A lot of times when you see passages in the Bible, it's kind of interesting. It was interesting to me when it will say Peter and the disciples, or Peter and his companions did this. Somehow like Peter's brought out sometimes as kind of like a leader or someone special to mention. We talked about how he was all in, right? So he knew he wanted to follow Christ. Even though he made mistakes, he picked himself up and he continued on. He didn't give up. And it showed how Jesus was patient, right? Jesus was patient with Peter. So we see a great example of Jesus not giving up on people. And I think of Peter, you see a great example of a person not giving up in a person. We don't have to worry about God giving up on us, but sometimes what we most have to worry about is us giving up on us, right? We make a mistake and we get very down on ourselves. It's so easy for that to happen. Sometimes we're our worst critic, and we make it difficult to, come back to Christ or to kind of get over the things that we've done. We carry that guilt. We can't let go of it sometimes. I think Peter's a good example of, even in the denial, he came right back, whereas I mentioned last week, Jeff, how sometimes you've done the comparison between Peter and Judas, how they both made that decision at the end of, the Gospels of what to do, and Judas was the one that ended up giving up his life, whereas Peter picked himself up and continued to follow Christ. So it was a good conversation last week. This week, we're going to do somebody a little bit easier, I think a little bit quicker, which is probably good, which is Matthew. We don't have nearly as much about Matthew as we have about some of the others, and we have more about Matthew than even some of the other apostles, right? Because we have nothing almost other than their name. But Matthew today, we're going to look at a few passages about Matthew. We're going to talk about him briefly. I actually had the passages up on the screen, I think, today for what we're going to look at. And I've kind of bunched them together because even though it looks like there's a lot of passages in there, they're all parallel. So the first three passages are parallel passages from the three different Gospels, and they're the calling of Matthew. So if you look at those, and I'll have them all up there, and we'll go ahead and go to those. Okay. So Matthew 9:9 is the one I have highlighted. So as Jesus went on from there, this is actually, he was in Capernaum. He saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth, and he said, "Follow me." And Matthew got up and followed him. Okay, and we can see, three parallel passages, and a couple of those he's called Levi, one he's called Matthew. One it mentions how he got up and left everything, so there's a little bit more added there, which we know if he's following Jesus, he's giving up his old way of life. So just to make sure that we cover it, Matthew's a tax collector. Tell me a little bit about what does that mean? Is that a highly regarded position by the Jews? Terrible position, yeah. Everybody hated him.
His paycheck depended on how much he extorted.
Yep. So the richer he was, the more he extorted probably from the people, right? Yep. Everybody hated him. You said that. Certainly disliked by the Jews. Now, Romans, he was doing their work for them. He paid them the taxes, but yet he could also extort the people to get extra money and make money, and they usually were seen as doing very well. So I wanted to watch a little bit of a scene this morning, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more because it adds some things I think to talk about that I think are interesting. Get this to work, and this is what we just read. Before it starts, let me just set the scene up a little bit. Matthew interesting thing is, when you read about the calling of Peter and Andrew, James and John, it seems like they're in Capernaum. Also, Levi's in Capernaum. So a couple of the movies, although we don't know this, when you watch them, they take that opportunity to actually have Matthew knowing Peter, Andrew, James, and John from the past. So actually, Matthew's the one that collects their taxes in the movie. So they have a special relationship with him because they can't stand him. So you see that in multiple movies where they just do not like Matthew. Not only because he's a tax collector just in general, but because they have a personal relationship with him because he's the one that's always taking their money. And you're going to see a little bit of this here too that's going to show up. Uh-oh. Clark, we might need yeah, he's going back. Wait a second. Gives me a thumbs up. Yeah.
You see the Parthian foot races last night? Darius ran like a gazelle.
Jews don't go to foot races.
Your old friend Simon himself used to run the wagering tables.
We're not friends. Next.
Okay, fine. So you did not go to the races? You stay home?
I went to see my mother.
Ugh, that would put me out, too. She asked when you're going to give her grandchildren?
She didn't ask.
I thought your parents don't speak to you.
I had questions I couldn't ask anyone else.
A mother of a son with talent like yours should be proud.
She's ashamed that I could use a talent that God gave me against God. Next.
You're good at something. You found a way to make a living doing it. It's that simple.
Must be nice to live in a world so simply
We
ordered.
live in the same world, Matthew.
Next.
Besides, what else are you going to do with a mind like yours?
Matthew. Matthew, son of Alphaeus.
Yes.
follow me.
Me?
Yes, you.
Whoa, 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 whoa. What are you doing?
You want me to join you?
Keep moving, street preacher.
Do you have any idea what this guy's done? Do you even know him?
Yes.
Listen, I said to... What are you doing? Where do you think you're going?
Guys, let me go.
Have you lost your mind? You have money. Quintus protects you. No Jew lives as good as you. You're gonna throw it all away.
Yes.
I don't get it.
You didn't get it when I chose you either.
But this is different. I'm not a tax collector.
Get used to different.
I'm glad we passed by your booth today, Matthew.
Yes.
Shall we? We have a celebration to prepare for.
You will regret this, Matthew.
What's the tablet for?
I grabbed it without thinking. You can put it back.
No, keep it. You may yet find use for it.
Where are we going?
A dinner party.
I'm not welcome at dinner parties.
Well, that's not going to be a problem tonight. You're the host.
So before we jump into the next section about Matthew, what type of things did you notice that they brought in there, the story? What's that? The Roman guy, yeah. So they had him kind of being guarded. In the show, they have, Matthew doesn't have many friends. The Jews all kind of hate him. Actually, his kind of interaction most with this is with this guard. They kind of have these talks. But I like how, what happened seemed ludicrous to both sides, right? So the guard that's standing there thinks it's crazy. Why would Matthew give up what he's given? He's got, money, position, power, kind of protected. Why would you give that up? So it seems crazy on that side. And then you have the apostles, in this instance, they have Peter stepping forward and saying, you know who this guy is, right? So it's ludicrous to him that he would be asking a tax collector to join him. So I kind of like how it showed that both sides were extremely puzzled at what's going on. Why would Matthew give up what he's got? And then why would Jesus ask a tax collector to be a part of the group? I think they asked some of the folks that were the disciples or the apostles to look as disgusted as possible. I don't know if you caught that on their faces. They just looked appalled that Jesus was asking a tax collector to join the group, and that they were going to be traveling around with this guy. And as the show goes on, we don't get a whole lot of glimpse of what goes on in the inner circle with Jesus. I mean, we do, but you see where James and John, there's a fighting of who's the greatest. But if you're cramming a bunch of people together from a lot of different backgrounds, there's going to be tension. And in the show, they certainly show tension with Matthew, that he doesn't just instantly get invited to the group and everybody's happy. It continues to go on where they just really struggle with him being there. So especially, Peter and some of them that might have known. Right. Right, yeah. That was a pretty good ending to that. So I like that as well. I also kind of like the comment. He was, the Roman guy was surprised about him going to see his parents, because that was part of it too, that he doesn't see his parents. He's an outcast. He's outcast of Jewish society. When he became a tax collector, in the show, at least the parents, he was an outcast to them, so they would not talk to him. So it just happens that, we don't know, what happened to Matthew before this that he saw in Jesus. What did he witness that when Jesus walked by the booth and said, "Follow me," he said, "I'm there." There's something, we don't get all the story, and that's kind of where we're going to get to this question of, well, whose story do you wish you had more of?
Yeah, but
Um, yep. 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 And there's going to be another one I'm going to show here too that we're going to talk about the same way, that you have this follow me and you wonder, was there more going on that we don't know about? And I'm sure there was. The Bible can't capture everything. So it's very interesting to kind of think about some of those things. Let's read a couple more passages here. Make sure I'm on track. So this is right after Matthew 9:9. It talks about the dinner party. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but the sinners." So he used this as Jesus used this as a wonderful example to, probably all the people that were sitting at the dinner party, as well as the Pharisees that showed up to kind of question him on this. So these are really the only two instances where we get a lot about Matthew from from the Gospels, right? So his calling, and then kind of this dinner party that happens after. The other special thing that we have about Matthew is he wrote a whole book, right? So we get a little bit of glimpse into Matthew from that. So if we look at the book of Matthew, just to bring out a couple things that are a little bit special that kind of get mentioned, is when you look at the book of Matthew, and this is another reason they kind of attribute it to him, is that in the book of Matthew, there's a lot of mentions of more specifics on money. So I pulled those numbers up there. Mark, there's one reference, Luke 4, Matthew 28, and there's different people that count it different ways, depending on the parable. But in all of them, Matthew, depending on how you count it, Matthew always comes out way ahead because he seems to be very specific on, mentioning the type of money or mentioning the amount, or having parables or stories in it about money that aren't in any of the other Gospels themselves. So like the parable of the vineyard with the wages and the different people coming along, or different groups coming along at different times of the day. That's Matthew that has that. The story of the debtors, the one that gets forgiven the great amount, and the one that gets forgiven a little. That's Matthew. So you kind of have these different stories on money. And then also you have all these references to the Torah and the Old Testament. And Matthew's the one that brings those up as well. So you see him really reaching out to that Jewish audience, helping them understand that this isn't something new. This is a continuation of what God has been planning on doing from long ago. So he's really reaching out to the Jewish audience as a book that seems to be really focused on them. So how would you describe this? We don't have a lot, but how would you describe Matthew? What do you think were, some of his characteristics, just knowing the life he lived, he was a tax collector? What's that? Lonely. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yep. Finance-centric. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
How much greater the change was in him maybe than others, because they gave up fishing and this kind of, he gave up a lot,
Right.
like you said, wealth and status and protection from the, country that they were in.
Right.
How maybe he changed more for that.
Right. It's possible. At least certainly the wealth part, he was, being a tax collector, very wealthy. I think it's kind of, maybe he went, although he was accepted, as part of Jesus' group, became an apostle, but, one of the things I thought about is how he was used to being an outcast. He was willing to be an outcast as a tax collector, and then eventually, I'm sure he had lots of opportunities to feel like an outcast and being a follower of Christ too. So that changed, but yet stayed the same a little bit probably too for him. He was willing to, society may not like this, but this is what I'm going to do. You know, he did that as a tax collector, and he did it when he followed Jesus. Right. Yeah. So is it, yeah.
Confidence in himself, and then to have to change that confidence from one direction to a completely different kind of confidence.
Right. Yeah, he had to get a lot of criticism and anger, maybe being spit on, you know, how he was treated by the Jews, but he was, you know, confident in that, willing to do that. Some of the other things I just thought about is probably being a tax collector. He was probably a smart guy, right? Good with money, good with numbers. This show, and you know, I think kind of picks that out, that he's very logical. So up to this point, you know, kind of weaving in that maybe he had seen some things that Jesus did. He was actually in the background in the story, not in the Bible, he's in the background when Peter and Andrew and James and John catch the fish. And he actually sees it happen. And he walks up to their father, Zebedee, after it's all done, and he's dealing with the fish after they've run off with Jesus. And he says, I don't understand what happened here. And he said, it's a good, you know, Zebedee says it's a good catch. And, you know, Peter says, no, I know how the world works. This isn't a good catch. This is impossible. So in the story, he's very much, he knows how the world works. This is how it happens, you know. But these things that I'm seeing, this catch I saw, and he happened to see another miracle of Jesus, he says, you know, in his mind, it just blew his mind. This is not how things are supposed to happen. So all those things lead up to that scene where Jesus walks by and says, follow me. And he's like, yes, I'm there. So just some of the comments from the group. Yeah, so I'll go through the list, actually. So we started out talking about how he's lonely. Wally talked a little bit about how he's finance-centric. That's his mind, you know, his ability. So focusing in on some of those stories in his gospel about finance and money. You know, you mentioned about how, you know, when you were reading through Matthew, he's kind of strict about how, you know, has those stories and those points he brings out about how we live. Mentioned about how he maybe than some of the other, and we don't know, but maybe than some of the other apostles, like some of the fishermen, he gave up even more. You know, he had a lot. He had the wealth that he gave up and the status that he gave up. You know, I mentioned about how he was an outcast as a tax collector, and then also probably being a follower of Jesus. And it was probably drastic. Olivia mentioned about it was drastic for him, maybe being that outcast. Maybe he didn't have as much interaction, or certainly didn't have it with the Jews. He would have had to have it with other outcasts. But that maybe it was something different for him to now be a part of a group, you know, especially to be a part of a Jewish group that was accepting him. So those were some of the things we touched on. Yep. I would assume so, but I don't know. Why do you mention? Right. Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. 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 Right. I think it's sometimes we ask the questions when we see people that we know or in our lives, like how they ended up, how did they get in a situation they got in, or how did they make the choices they made, and there's a story to it, right? There's something that's happened along the way that led them into that. So you wonder, what was the story of Matthew that led him into, the tax collector? Was it just he was, saw the money aspect of it, or was there just kind of a series of things that just pushed him along the way to be willing to be a tax collector? So. Right, yeah, right. The IRS knocks on our door, we're not happy, right? Yeah, so it's not uncommon today, too. Right, and would he have responded like he did, too? Right? So Andy? Right. That's a good point. Yeah, he ended up being hated by his people because of being a tax collector. But then when you look at his book's actually reaching out to the people that, didn't like him, that he was an outcast from. So it's kind of interesting to flip there, yeah. Right. Right. He grew up a Jew, right? So he was taught. So yeah, very good. Let me. So I'm not going to. I had Nathanael up here. I was going to show a little clip from the movie on Nathanael, and the reason I picked Nathanael was because we have, just a little bit in the Bible about his story, where Jesus sees him. He walks up to Jesus. Let me see if so he walks up to Jesus. The next day, Jesus wanted to go into Galilee, and he found Philip. Jesus said to Philip, "Follow me," and Philip was from Bethsaida, the hometown of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law and the prophets, Jesus, Joseph's son from Nazareth." And Nathanael responded, "Can anything from Nazareth be good?" And Philip says, "Come and see." Jesus saw Nathanael coming towards him, and he said, "Here is a genuine Israelite in whom there is no deceit." And Nathanael asked him, "How do you know me?" And Jesus answered, "Before Philip called you, I saw you under the fig tree." And Nathanael says, "Rabbi, you're God's son. You are the King of Israel." So it was interesting in the clip I was going to show you, they tried to come up with, maybe why. There's millions of things that could have been the reason for why Jesus said this, and he was, once again, kind of that scene of all in. You're the Son of God. You're the Son of Man. But we don't know, right? There's constant speculation. Scholars speculate about what this might have meant. But, there's just those things in the Bible that we don't know the exact answer, although we try to get, yeah, Bill?
I think we need to keep in mind that God's at work.
Yeah, yeah. And all these people,
All these things we're wondering about.
Yeah.
Remember, God's at work.
Right. Yep. There's something he, obviously he knew why these people were the ones that, Jesus called and they were chosen. We don't know all their backstories, but absolutely, God's at work. And I think that's what I wanted to end with today is a question I'll ask and try to get a couple quick answers because I know I'm running over again on time. But, John ends his book saying Jesus did many things, and we can't write them all down, right? The world would be filled, the world couldn't hold everything that Jesus did. And there's just so much of the Bible that we don't know the stories about, that we would love to know, things that went on. So I'll throw it out there. If anybody has a couple examples, is there a person in the Bible that you wish you knew their story more than you do now? Especially New Testament. Anybody that jumps out to you, you always thought like, I wish I knew more grace?
I would say the woman at the well. As we were talking about Matthew's story, it really reminded me of hers about how she also was an outcast for various different reasons.
Yeah.
Yet Jesus chose her to reveal himself
Yeah.
as the Messiah to, and I've always wondered like what he saw in her and like what her story, the story was a lot of rejection and hurt. But similarly to Matthew, she then goes back to her people, and being a Samaritan woman, like it was unheard of that a man, let alone a Jewish man, would talk to her. And going back and sharing that with her people who would have rejected her for even doing that.
Right. And I think like Bill said, God's at work. This is an example. Jesus went to the well and waited, right? He was waiting,
How would you feel if somebody you've never seen before could come up to you and tell you everything you've ever done?
Right. And that's the other thing. It's amazing. You wonder, wanting to know the rest of the story. What was it that he told her?
This was, he does this 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
Because that's quite a few of them.
Yeah. So any other people you wish you knew their stories, Sue? Lazarus? Yeah. 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 People pulling the Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good one too. Any other thoughts? Who would you love to know more about? Mine was, if I was going to bring mine was going to be yours too, was the woman at the well. All right, well, thank you all. Next week, Clark is going to be teaching. We're going to be here in the morning and then headed up to West Virginia after services with Grace and I. She is my co-pilot. She's going to be going with me, and she's going to be the other chaperone, and then we have the 5 teens with us. So please keep that in mind. Keep us in your prayers so we have a good week starting next Sunday. So it's my 3, so Evan, Kate, and Kaylee. And then Bethany's daughter, Kaylee Rose, is going. And then Penny's daughter, Delaney, is going. So, all right. Well, thank you all, especially for your comments and conversation. Appreciate it.